The quickest way to end any GOAT debate is by making this claim: basketball is a team sport, therefore it is unfair to compare individual talents. And while this claim does a good job evading an individual GOAT debate, all that really happened was we pivoted the debate from player comparisons and moved the goalpost to team comparisons. Following the logic here, instead of putting an asterisk on individual players, we must then put an asterisk on various NBA teams and dynasties throughout time. Speaking of time, let's not waste any time and discuss the dynasty that played before there even was time, aka the pre-shot clock era. The dynasty of this era was the Minneapolis Lakers, led by George Mikan. They won 5 championships in 6 years, 1949, 1950, 1952, 1953, and 1954. They dominated the early years of the NBA as a formidable team. The biggest asterisk against this team is the fact that the NBA was in its infancy. The league was still developing its rules and structures. It really isn't the NBA we know today. On a literal level, there was no shot clock. And if there was a shot clock, that thing would have buzzed a long time ago. There's nothing left to talk about here. Let's move on to the next dynasty. The next dynasty is the Boston Celtics dynasty from 1957 to 1969. Nice. This dynasty, led by Bill Russell, won 11 championships in 13 years, including 8 consecutive titles from 1959 to 1966. In my older asterisk on each GOAT video, I talked about how Bill defeated plumbers and electricians, but looking back at it, I feel like that statement may have been a little too harsh. Fundamentally, I still agree with the idea that many NBA players had multiple jobs in this era, thus they didn't have the financial opportunity to put 110% effort into basketball alone like the players of the modern era, but this is not their fault. However, on a purely on-the-court analysis, this will still hinder their potential to compete with athletes who have access to modern sports technology, medicine, and preparation, and thus this is their biggest asterisk. We don't see a true NBA dynasty until something called the three-point arc makes its way into the NBA. Let me set the stage for you. The year is 1979, and for the 79-1980 season, 2 NCAA legends make their way into the National Basketball Association. This phenomenon is so amazing, it's time to roll out the lights, camera, and hit action. It's showtime, baby. Pun intended, or maybe not. Showtime Lakers? More like slow time Lakers. The quote-unquote Showtime Lakers were running at a pace factor of 103. Even for the 80s, that's mediocre at best, but for dynasties and all-time teams, that's quite slow. Now, the NBA is a marathon, not a sprint, and speed isn't always a good thing, but this team does have speed, just in the wrong places. For instance, how many modern dynasties have been swept in the finals before? Only one, and that's the snooze time Lakers. They were swept twice, once in 1983 by the 76ers, and another by the 1989 Pistons. And I can hear the comments already. Don't say it. Before you say the word injury, let me say the same word right back at you. Many of the Lakers' wins could be attributed to injuries of their opponents. Take, for example, the 1985, nearly half the teams in the league had major stars and players suffering from major injuries, which gave the Lakers a cakewalk to the finals, and the Celtics were once again really banged up by the time they got there. And then there's the 1988 finals, where Isaiah Thomas played the 4th quarter of Game 6 with a swollen ankle, a poked eye, a cut on his face, and a broken finger. He was injured and not a factor in Game 7. So if you're going to say the Showtime Lakers got swept due to injury, please consider that a lot of their rings were due to their opponents being injured as well. When you look at the 80s NBA landscape as a whole, the Eastern Conference was the beast of the East, and the Western Conference, while top-heavy, overall was more of the Weakstern Conference than the Western Conference. The 80s West had the Showtime Lakers, a spunky Rockets team in the mid-80s thanks to Hakeem the Dream, and of course Moses Malone before he moved east. But after that, it's a ghost town, a bunch of lottery teams. The 80s East, on the other hand, had prime Larry Bird and his Celtics, the prime bad boy Pistons, a new up-and-coming Jordan's Bulls team, an extremely underrated and defensive Bucks team with the likes of Sidney Moncrief, the first player to win Defensive Player of the Year, and then there was the 76ers with Dr. J, who eventually added Moses Malone. I really want you to consider this because sure, 5 rings and 9 finals appearances is nothing to scoff at, but if we're doing a pure quantity debate, the Showtime Lakers don't have the best quantity, the 60s Celtics do, and if we're doing a quality debate, the Showtime Lakers have sweep stains on their record, and they had cakewalks to the finals. I'd like to see them go to 9 finals if they were going up against those crazy Eastern Conference teams of the 80s. The Showtime Lakers dynasty ends where the Bulls dynasty begins, which is in 1991, so naturally this needs to be the next team we discuss. And how dare anyone criticize the only dynasty that went undefeated? Every other dynasty lost at least one NBA Finals. The Bulls dynasty is the only dynasty that won every finals they've ever been to. They had 2 different three-peats, so no way should anyone criticize this team, right? Wrong. I'm gonna criticize them. I'm gonna criticize the Bulls outside of chronological order, and instead criticize things that I think are most important to maybe not super important. And the first thing that comes to my noggin on what could have been the Bulls dynasty is that 1997 NBA Finals. Right before Steve Kerr's most iconic shot of his career to win the series, Scottie Pippen just got done committing the most obvious goaltend in NBA history that did not get called. He was literally shaking the rim, yet the refs didn't blow the whistle. And sure, at best, this would have forced a Game 7. It doesn't guarantee the Bulls lose the series, but 1, it would have destroyed the mythos that Jordan would never even have to play a Game 7, and 2, anything can happen in a Game 7. The Jazz really could have won. But let's rewind a few years back and talk about that 1995 season, when the Orlando Magic beat the Bulls in 6 games in the second round. And yes, you could say that Jordan was rusty due to coming out of retirement, but usually that type of criticism is the other way around. The more valid excuse is usually that players get fatigued from playing too much basketball and not getting enough rest. Jordan seems to be the only player who suffered from too much rest, apparently. And following that season's playoff blunder was the so-called legendary 72-10 season. Surely that was amazing, and yes, in a vacuum this is a great achievement, but don't be blind by a nice record number and ask yourself this question: was this even the best iteration of the Bulls? Really, think about it. One could argue that the 92 Bulls have a very strong claim to the title of the best Bulls team. Pre-baseball Jordan was more athletic and better defensively than post-baseball Jordan. The same could be said about Scottie in the first three-peat versus Scottie in the second three-peat. And let's not forget, the 90s as a whole was the expansion era of the NBA, so there was a ton of cannon fodder, especially in the Eastern Conference, for Jordan and the Bulls to have an easy time beating weak teams, which also inflates these win-loss records. And hey, there's one thing we can't deny: that triangle offense must have been good because it survived moving from one dynasty franchise to another with the Kobe Shaq Lakers led by head coach Phil Jackson on both dynasties. The biggest threat to the Kobe and Shaq dynasty is Kobe and Shaq themselves. This dynasty was so short-lived because they simply couldn't get past the sacrifice of leadership roles. One of the most simple psychological aspects of team sports is deciding that one player must follow a specific set of roles and another player must follow a different set of roles. This is something to be understood even at the recreational level, let alone the professional level. This truly is the Batman and Superman of duos. Usually NBA duos are Batman and Robin. One clearly takes the role of leader, another of sidekick. What happens when Batman and Superman team up? While there is an illusion of cooperation, because they are just too amazing as superheroes, eventually they end up having some disagreement that causes a complete rift or split. And hey, put the comic book analogy to the side, the 3 chips the Lakers did win was against a Pacers team led by Reggie Miller that was still really good, but this wasn't the 90s Reggie Miller. Technically, you could still say he wasn't his prime in the year 2000, but this certainly was the beginning of the end of that prime to say the least. Then, they beat an offensively challenged 76ers team. Their third ring was against a 52-win Nets team, and that finals can be best described by this photo. Yes, that is a photo of Shaq dunking on all 5 Nets players at once. I don't think I've ever seen a photo like that before in any NBA Finals. So after this duo had their three-peat, they got absolutely embarrassed by a Pistons team with no All-75 players on their roster, aka no franchise superstar, simply outschooled by fundamental X's and O's. Speaking of fundamental X's and O's, what better team to transition to than the Spurs dynasty? The issue with the Spurs dynasty is the word dynasty in itself. At the semantic level, what even is an NBA dynasty? To visualize this question, here is a timeline of each modern NBA dynasty discussed in this video. The Spurs are the only dynasty that lasts 14 years and overlaps another dynasty, which makes no sense logically. How can there be two dynasties at the same time? For a team to truly be a dynasty, it must be dominant over competition. Now, dynasty in itself is a subjective term, and there's no hard definition for it. Thus, again, this is semantical. However, if a team is losing in the NBA Finals or not even making the NBA Finals due to better teams not only repeating but three-peating, then maybe they weren't a dynasty during that specific time frame. Don't get this twisted, I'm not saying the Spurs dynasty did not exist. I do believe that there is a Spurs dynasty. However, the 1999 Lockout Championship team and the 2014 Kawhi Leonard ring is far too distant and far too alien from the 2003, 2005, and 2007 Spurs reign. The true Spurs dynasty only has 3 rings, not 5. Again, this is subjective since there's no hard definition of a dynasty, but if you're going to have a soft definition and just say, hey, Tim Duncan was on all these rosters, therefore it's a dynasty, just imagine doing the same thing with the Miami Heat, saying that Heat dynasty was 3 rings and not 2, as Dwayne Wade won a ring in 2006, another in 2012, and a final one in 2013. See how that doesn't fit right, even though Dwayne Wade was technically on all 3 of those teams? So while yes, there is a constant with Tim Duncan being on all of these Spurs rings, if we have such a loose word for dynasty, just understand that the more dynasties there are, the less each dynasty is worth. Dynasty inflation, if you will. So with that being said, let's take a quick look at the Spurs finals tenure from 2003 to 2007. In 03, they beat a 49-win Nets team in the finals, one of the lowest winning teams to make a finals. In 2005, they did beat a Pistons team that may have been burnt out from beating the Lakers in the previous year, whereas the Spurs, on the other hand, had an easy trip to the finals after the Lakers blew up, thus it was wide open for them to get there, and even then the series went to 7 games, it was gritty and a close call regardless. Moving on to 07, they defeated the Cleveland Clowns with a young LeBron James and the circus behind him who had no business even being in the finals, and that was the 3 Spurs ring. Let's not forget that Kobe Bryant has an 18-12 record against Tim Duncan in the playoffs. He's the only player with a winning postseason record against the big fundamental, which means one could argue the Spurs dynasty only exists as a dynasty because Kobe and Shaq had drama. I'm not saying the Spurs wouldn't have been champs without Kobe or Shaq, or that they sucked because Kobe and Shaq split. That's not true. The Spurs would have won chips and made through the cracks regardless. I'm talking about would have they been a dynasty, and not just any dynasty, a sincere dynasty. To win multiple rings in such a condensed time frame, this could be argued as largely due to Kobe and Shaq splitting up, leaving the West open. And last but not least, or maybe last but least, the Golden State Warriors dynasty. There's no denying this dynasty had talent, but sometimes that is a detriment to the value of the dynasty as a whole and what it was able to accomplish. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Think of the Dream Team or any Team USA Olympic gold team. Not many people put a lot of stock or value into Olympic gold medals when discussing GOAT debates, because truly, what is the accomplishment of gathering a bunch of all-stars to defeat a team that was clearly not in the same echelon of competition? For example, the only players we bring up gold medals in for GOAT debates are ringless players like Charles Barkley and Carmelo Anthony. Deep down, we know this is, for lack of a better word, a cope that they don't have a ring, thus we pretend that gold medal can pretend to be a ring. With this same mindset, the rings Kevin Durant won with the Warriors are kinda like Olympic gold medals. Yes, on a physical level, they are real trophies and the banners do get hung into the rafters, but on an intangible level, these awards simply do not carry the same weight as, say, when LeBron in the 2016 Cavs forced the Warriors to choke a 3-1 lead, which is such a large stain on this Warriors dynasty that one loss is more famous than all of the rings they've achieved. Sincerely, when I say the phrase Warriors Finals, what is the first finals that comes to your head? I can't be 100% certain, I can only guess, but my best guess is the first finals that comes to your head is that 2016 finals. Let's continue this logic game. For example, if I said, what is the first thing that comes to your head when I say the phrase Kobe Finals, are most people going to immediately think of the 2004 loss to the Pistons, or are they instantly going to remember that classic 2010 finals against the Celtics? My guess is the 2010 finals. The instant brain chemical reaction to the phrase Warriors Dynasty would be that they choked the 2016 finals. And let's recap their finals. Their first finals, they defeated a heavily injured Cavs team. It was basically LeBron and some D-leaguers, and even then LeBron pushed them to 6 games. In the second finals, they had the worst choke job in NBA history. Then comes the Kevin Durant finals. These are the Olympic gold medals against, even then, a really beat up Cavs team, especially 2018. They had no business being in the finals. And the KD Warriors era ends to losing to the Raptors, another dynasty with a loss on their record. And sure, their 2022 finals win was nice, but it was against an inexperienced Celtics team with the core who'd never been on that stage before. So all in all, the Warriors dynasty choked a 3-1 lead, and there's no escaping that. What can be escaped is this video, because it's pretty much over. This was my asterisk on each NBA dynasty. Let me know if you think I missed NBA dynasty. Should Larry Bird's Celtics be counted as a dynasty? Who knows? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to dunk on that like button and subscribe with notifications turned on. I'm Rebound Rewind, and I'll fast forward to you later.